Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who is watching and sharing these moments of the celebration of the 160th anniversary of the Medium's book. I am Kirsten DeMello from the United States, and I'll also be your MC for today, this evening, or whatever time zone you're in. So sit back, relax, and try to enjoy. And we are super grateful for everyone's virtual presence here today and the presentations to be shown here today. And just a few things, this event is promoted by the International Spiritist Council, is being represented by several countries affiliated to this organization and committed to the spread of Spiritism throughout the world. On behalf of the International Spiritist Council, we invite you to watch an introductory video about our honored guest, the Medium's book.
Live event 160th anniversary of the Medium's book. The Medium's book by Allan Kardec was published in Paris on January 15, 1861. It is one of the 5 books that compose the Spiritist codification. This year, we celebrate its 160th anniversary. The Medium's book contains the special instruction of the spirits on the theory of all kinds of manifestations, the means of communicating with the invisible world, the development of mediumship, and the challenges encountered in the practice of Spiritism. Let's celebrate this important date, reviewing the backbone of the Medium's book and reflecting on the importance of using mediumship as a tool for our spiritual evolution. The International Spiritist Council presents this special event with the participation of several countries and in 6 languages, representing the importance of these teachings to the whole world.
Beautiful. Before we start the first lecture, let us connect with the higher minds, higher spirituality through prayer. And for that, we invite our friend Tanya Moore, who's a volunteer with the Spiritist Society of Ireland, based on the beautiful west coast of Ireland, to do the opening prayer. Please, Tanya.
So let us connect in heart and mind, though distant physically. Let us come closer spiritually, mentally, and connect to those in spirit who guide us and who are overseeing the event, and pray for their inspiration for the speakers, to enlighten the minds of those of us who are listening, so that we all gain from the work and studies done, but most of all from the extraordinary work of the spirits and of Allan Kardec. May your love find a way to make these words reverberate and reach out to those who most need it, to bless those who are doing good with their mediumship, to find ways of bringing comfort and uplifting the spirits of those around them. And for those who struggle, God, may your love find a way of passing on the guidance, the support, and the teachings, so as to help all of us to understand better how to use this instrument increasingly for good, until someday it may be exclusively for good. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Tanya. That was beautiful. Now, we are happy to introduce Peter Hayes from the United States. Peter is the president of the Spiritist group of Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. He's a very active worker in the Spiritist movement, and Peter has been a great collaborator to the United States Spiritist Federation. He will be presenting the first talk entitled The Backbone of the Medium's Book. Peter, please, we are excited to hear you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you very much for having me. It is an honor. The Medium's book, the backbone of the Medium's book. This weekend happens to be, we're celebrating Passover. The Seder dinner in Passover, the Seder means order. And Passover celebrates the liberation that led to the search for the Promised Land. Well, in some ways, the Medium's book is a kind of search, if you will, for our spiritual progress, which is also kind of a search for the Promised Land. I'm going to go through the entire structure of the Spirit's book in order, and it is a huge subject. And so what I'm really going to be doing is trying to cover as many points as possible, and it's kind of a speed through. So here we go. First, with the introduction of the Spirit's book. The purpose of this book is that it's not an all-purpose recipe for training mediums. Its purpose is to help aid those who already have the gift. It is to help people to know how to communicate with spirits. It is for all who wish to observe spirit phenomena. Now, the Medium's book is over 600 pages long, and that was done on purpose because it's designed for those who see a serious purpose in Spiritism. Kardec points out that a much shorter version would have been a disservice. Another issue was that at the time, frivolous mediums had caused a lot of harm and created a lot of skepticism about mediumship. So the Medium's book was an attempt to look at mediumship in a very serious and methodical way. It is a practical guide for spirit manifestations. And finally, Kardec advises us that before we read the Medium's book, it's a very good idea to actually read the Spirit's book, the first book in the codification, which is the foundation of the codification. The structure of the Medium's book, well, it's made up of two central parts, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is only 4 chapters, and it's called Preliminary Observations. Part 2 is 32 chapters, and you can divide it up into 3 sections. Section 1, or A, is 13 chapters, that's spirit phenomena. 2, mediums, that's chapter 14 through 20, and 3, surroundings, chapter 21 through 32. The chapters of the Medium's book are laid out by categorizing different types of spirit phenomena, mediums, different kinds of spirits, etc. And therefore, the book is an attempt to be scientific. So let's look at Preliminary Observations, Part 1, made up of 4 chapters. It talks about what sort of practices, or what does one have to do to be a good spiritist? What are some of the good practices? Well, first of all, to be a spiritist, one believes in the existence of discarnate spirits. To be a spiritist, one must believe in God. A spiritist must believe in an intelligent principle that's separate from matter. So there's more than just matter interacting and causing things to occur. And that spirits can improve. There's no such thing as a permanent heaven or hell, a subject that's explored in more detail in the book, Heaven and Hell, in the codification. Kardec argues that those who deny spirits exist should prove their existence is impossible. In chapter 2, it is about the extraordinary and the supernatural, and that spirit phenomena is based on this fundamental principle. Every intelligent effect must have an intelligent cause. One hears this a lot. It's sort of a core point that Spiritism makes. And one should understand Spiritism thoroughly before refuting it. And Kardec points out that understanding Spiritism takes months and years, not a few hours. So once again, if one's going to criticize Spiritism, at least take the time and thoroughly understand it first. And the reason I mention that in part because Kardec was attacked a lot in his day. And so often he had to address these kinds of criticisms. And in methodology, Kardec was an educator, by the way, but the Medium's book explores in the chapter of methodology how to approach spirit phenomena. But he also goes through the different levels of those who are skeptics or those who are supporters of Spiritism. But it's interesting in his overall comment in doing that is that he wants to emphasize a few things. That Kardec argues that spirit phenomena is outside the laws of matter, and that the laws of physiology are powerless to explain everything. In chapter 4, there's different theories, and he goes through a list of theories that explain phenomena and spiritist facts. But in doing so, Kardec points out that all these theories that he examines in section part 1 include the ones that deny spirit phenomena. They're based on certain incomplete and badly interpreted observations. Well, this is one of the reasons why the Medium's book was created, because there was a lot of misinformation out there. And so Kardec, with the guide of the spirits, was trying to clarify and deepen our awareness of the invisible world. Now, in part 2 of the Medium's book, which is the vast majority of the Medium's book, it's called Spirit Manifestations, and you can think of it in 3 sections as follows. Section 1, Phenomena. Section 2, all about mediums. And section 3, Surroundings. And I'm going to go through each section bit by bit. Physical manifestations and turning tables. Well, section 1 of part 2 begins by emphasizing spirits really do exist as a fundamental point. And then he starts to focus on physical manifestations and turning tables. And turning tables will always represent the starting point of the Spiritist codification, because it was through the Spiritist phenomena that Kardec began to observe this, and then it led to more information later on. In order for spirit phenomena to occur, a medium is needed, and the qualities and nature of that medium is key to how easily a table is lifted, for example, even a heavy one. Since every intelligent effect has an intelligent cause, it is necessary to recognize when a manifestation reveals an intention behind it. The Medium's book emphasizes that if we are witnessing some kind of manifestation, we'll rule out the obvious. Make sure it's not some natural cause. Don't immediately assume that it's caused by a spirit of some kind. And then Kardec and the Medium's book explains what causes spirit phenomena. Well, this is a general point. How does a spirit move a solid object? Well, they use their perispirit, not their hands. And that a spirit is combining a portion of the universal fluid with the fluid emitted by the medium in order to move it. This is a medium who happens to be in the room where an object may be moving or some kind of phenomena is occurring, a visual manifestation, for instance. And the medium would not necessarily have any idea that he or she's energy, fluid, if you will, is being interacted with to cause this phenomena to occur. Generally speaking, spirit phenomena, pretty much everything that's described in section 1 under phenomena, is usually caused by spirits of a lower order. And that doesn't matter if it's physical, audible, visual manifestations, and so forth. And that in most cases, spirits of a higher order do not engage in this activity. Occasionally, there might be an exception. For instance, the spirit we call Spirit of Truth, the one that helped orchestrate the creation of the codification. It is said that the Spirit of Truth needed to get Kardec's attention, and therefore the Spirit of Truth relied upon a physical phenomena to get Kardec to notice, and then that led to an ongoing communication, and then that was no longer necessary. The content and the structure of the Medium's book points out the following. Spiritism began with nonverbal spirit phenomena, but the Spiritist codification became possible because of written communications. Direct communications from spirits, both written and verbal, demonstrate a deeper, more important understanding of our relationship with the physical world. Now, spirit manifestations is part of mediums, or section 2 of Part 2, Spirit Manifestations, focuses on mediums and the different aspects of mediums. Basic point: every individual who senses the influence of spirits to any degree of intensity is a medium. That would drop a strong hint that everybody, to some extent, has some kind of mediumship, but I'll say more about that in a moment. Mediumship is a natural and mostly a physical gift. People either have it or they don't, essentially. That is overt, ostensive mediumship. But all people have some capacity for mediumship, so it is given freely by God. The fact that mediumship is a natural gift available to pretty much everybody, even if it's just a casual moment of intuition, for instance, it's given freely by God. And this is a very important point that the medium's book is making. There are a variety of mediums who can experience or help produce the phenomena of physical effects. This includes seeing mediums, hearing mediums, and there are many other varieties as well. But all of them are interacting with the spirit, whether they know it or not. But as Spiritism developed, direct communication with spirits became the core of mediumship. And here's an interesting quote: of all the forms of communication, manual writing is the simplest, most convenient, and especially the most complete. All efforts should be made to develop it, for it enables relationships to be established with spirits that are as lasting and regular as those we maintain among ourselves. So really, section 2 of part 2 on mediums is emphasizing this general point in various ways. There's two sort of general types of mediums. Mechanical mediums, that is, a spirit acts directly on the medium's hand. A medium's absolute unawareness characterizes those whom we call passive or mechanical mediums. And this is a valuable approach to mediumship because it does not leave doubt about independent thought. But intuitive mediums are those in which the spirit acts upon the medium's soul, but in this situation, the medium is conscious of what is being written, although it is not a reflection of his or her own thought. Now, a lot of mediums can be a combination of the two, physical, intuitive. After all, the medium's book is giving categories and labels to things, but that doesn't mean there's not a combination or a blending of different abilities. Some key points for the development of mediums. Well, when mediums are novices, one of the biggest challenges mediums face, the main difficulty encountered by most, involves having to deal with less evolved spirits because they try to interfere with that medium or disturb that medium in some way. The first precaution for novice mediums is to arm themselves with sincere faith under the protection of God. The second precaution is to study the Spiritist codification. Obviously, both of these are very important. Studying the Spiritist codification cannot be emphasized enough. Also, mediums in general, in terms of their development, need to trust the process and not force it. Here's an interesting quote. We have stated above that there are cases in which it does not matter if a thought comes from the medium or from a spirit. This is especially true when purely intuitive or inspired mediums are writing a work involving their own imagination. In such a case, it matters little whether or not a thought has been suggested to them. In other words, intuitive mediumship is a perfectly valid way of communicating, because sometimes people may get very hung up on, oh, how do I know this is truly an authentic communication coming from a spirit? Well, we may not know 100%, but as mediums gain more experience, they can begin to tell the difference. And a lot of mediumship is about a mixture of the medium's thoughts interacting with the spirit's thoughts. And I'll say more about that in a moment. It's always possible that mediums could lose their mediumship. Why could that happen? Well, a few reasons. It could be a test of their patience, perhaps a test of their perseverance, most certainly. If a medium has lost his or her mediumship, there may be a good reason for it. Maybe they just need a break. And If it is better they abstain, then they should obey this advice. They should not be trying to jumpstart their mediumship in some way or go to another medium and stuff like that. They need to understand and appreciate that probably if a medium has lost his or her mediumship, it's a temporary experience. It's not a permanent one. So it's not a time to panic, not a time to start forcing things to occur. And losing one's mediumship is not always a rebuke. Like I said, maybe a medium just needs to take a break for some good reason. But this is where we learn to trust the mentor spirits who are in charge. The role of mediums in communications is to serve as interpreters or filters. So in general, it's easier for spirits, and they prefer mediums with knowledge of the content they want to communicate. It is a given that the thought will bear the personal stamp of that medium. It's not an absolute requirement. Obviously, there are mediums that can transmit messages having no idea what the subject is. You know, a medium, for instance, may not know anything about science, and yet that medium is interpreting a lot of information that's very advanced scientific. But if that medium has a background in science, it's much easier. And another way of thinking about this process of communications and being interpreters, there's a nice example in the medium's book about a group of bottles filled with liquids of different colors. Imagine each medium is a bottle of a different color, red, blue, green, that sort of thing. And then the quote is, "Our rays only reach those objects that we want to illuminate by taking on the coloration or personal style of these mediums." So that gives you an idea of how these communications are occurring. It's a given that the communication is filtering through the medium in some way. This section, section 2, ends with the medium's moral influence. And it says that mediumship is available to all regardless of their morality. Therefore, it's not the exclusive domain of a select and elite few. But mediumship can be taken away when it's misused, as I mentioned before. And when this happens, there were usually warnings ahead of time. If mediums allow themselves to become instruments of error, the more evolved spirits will not step in to rescue them. God provides the gift of mediumship so that if it is ever taken away, a medium will understand, quote, the odiousness of his betrayal. That's from item 226. All moral imperfections are open doors for evil spirits, but the one they most easily exploit is pride, because pride is the one people least often confess about themselves. That's an interesting comment, isn't it? We don't like to admit when we're proud, and that can create a blind spot with us. And item 228 mentions that many gifted mediums have been lost due to pride. Unfortunately, this obviously can happen, and it doesn't matter how inexperienced a medium might be. You could have a medium at a center for years and years and years, but if he or she has pride in some way or gets a little too convinced that he or she knows everything, well, that might be creating an opening, and the consequences may occur as a result. Section 3 of part 2 is spirit manifestations. This is a big section of the medium's book as well. Now, when we talk about surroundings, part of what that means, of course, is that we are surrounded by spirits all the time, a subject that gets addressed in the spirits book as well. Our behavior is what attracts good or bad spirits in the first place. Think about this comment that's in the medium's book. A country's moral tone can be reflected by the spiritual company of its citizens. It's an interesting way to look at things, isn't it? Look at a country, look at the attitudes, look at the prevailing, if there's a prevailing attitudes, and what are they? And that might be a hint. In terms of spirit surroundings, understanding when and how to identify with the invisible world will help us to educate and improve ourselves. Here's a nice quote. Don't forget that the essential and exclusive goal of Spiritism is your improvement. To teach that goal, the spirits have received permission to initiate you into the future life, offering you examples that you may use to your advantage. Again, the Medium's book is helping us to understand this process. The more you identify with the world that awaits you, the less you will suffer in the one where you now are. This encapsulates the present objective of Spiritist revelation. As we attempt to interact with spirits through mediumship in a mediumistic meeting at a Spiritist center, there are some questions we can always ask ourselves, such as, will our interactions within a mediumistic meeting be fruitful or positive? Will they be unproductive and negative? Well, the short answer is, as it's here, that depends on us. For instance, in order to handle ourselves well, we need to know how to protect ourselves when surroundings are not so positive or potentially not positive. This is chapter 23 on obsession, which opens with, of all the difficulties presented in the practice of Spiritism, among the worst we must place obsession, which is the domination that certain spirits may acquire over certain individuals. Now, at first glance, this might be kind of a scary subject, but I'll make a few points about it. First of all, there's three general types of obsession. Simple obsession, that occurs when a malevolent spirits impose themselves on mediums. Now, usually mediums should be aware of this, or they should be able to recognize the signs of this type of simple obsession occurring. Therefore, it can be more of a nuisance. Included with simple obsession can be physical obsession, which consists in noisy and obstinate manifestations of certain spirits who spontaneously produce raps and other sounds. Remember, I mentioned in section 1 of part 2, when we talked about spirit phenomena, that this is caused by spirits of a lower order. So spirits of a lower order who may be feisty for some reason or other may be causing all kinds of noises that may be happening with a particular medium. So he or she may be attracting this, and therefore it can be signs of simple obsession, which then means that medium has to find ways to work on that. The next level of obsession is more serious, fascination. It refers to a delusion created directly by a spirit in the thought of a medium, which in a certain manner paralyzes his or her capacity to judge the quality of the communications. In other words, a medium begins to lose his or her objectivity. Perhaps the spirit tells the medium how amazing he or she is, and the medium believes it and starts to be a little prideful and things like that. Or a medium doesn't like criticism of his or her communications very much, even though evaluation of communications from spirits is absolutely essential in mediumistic meetings. The third category of obsession would be subjugation. This is the most serious. This is what more greater mental or physical control. It's when individuals may behave in very strange or erroneous ways or engage in behavior that should be avoided. A lot of times help from others is needed when obsession has gone to the level of subjugation. What causes obsession? Well, the general answer is that really depends on the character of the spirits. Perhaps they have a desire for revenge, a desire to harm due to personal suffering and unhappiness that spirit has. You know, misery loves company, that kind of thing. Perhaps they just get pleasure is derived from the impatience or blindness of those they victimize. They love playing tricks on individuals or tormenting them, especially when people don't have any idea why my day has been so bad and stuff like that. And then another possibility is they just are cowards. Think about cyber bullies today. How much courage does it take to be a cyber bully? How do we confront obsession? Well, The difficulties mediums have with spirits obsessing them and the difficulty in changing this situation usually has to do with some issue in the medium's personality that attracts that spirit in the first place. This is a key point. It's kind of a basic summary of from item 254, which 7 questions are asked. It's the gist of it. Mediums have to we have to know thyself. The whole point of Spiritism is for us to improve ourselves. So the more we work on our personal improvement, the more we're honest about the flaws in our personality, the things we need to work on, then the more we have control over the kind of environment that we begin to attract. We can begin to clean up the environment around us, if you will, if we start attracting better spiritual company. This section of surroundings, section 3 of part 2, does focus on this question of identity. And Kardec emphasizes that this is a controversial subject because, and therefore this section focuses on what we should and should not worry about when it comes to identifying spirits. First of all, it's difficult to know a spirit's identity with certainty. So in a way, worrying about who the spirit really is not that important. These days, and in terms of mediumistic meetings, these days meetings in a typical Spiritist center, they're run by the mentors of that center, and they're the ones who determine which spirits show up in a meeting to receive help. And one of the things that occurs in mediumistic meetings is we don't go around asking the spirits their name, usually. Very rarely, I would say. It doesn't matter who the spirit is. Here's the main point that the Medium's book makes. We judge the quality and character of a spirit by the language, not a name. We may see impressive names throughout the codification, Paul of Tarsus, St. Augustine, and so forth. Do we know it's really them? Well, we think that it might be. Do we have 100% proof? No. Does it matter? Not too much, because there may be a lot of spirits working on their behalf. And at the end of the day, it's the message, not the messenger, that actually matters. But there are always things to look for in communications. So here, for instance, in item 264, benevolence and kindness are also essential attributes of purified spirits. They do not feed hate toward humans or other spirits. They pity weakness and criticize error, but always with moderation and without bitterness or animosity. Intelligence is no guarantee of moral superiority. You can have scholars that couldn't be a product of their corporeal life. In other words, you may have a great scholar from the past, but suppose that scholar was also a racist, because that was common in that scholar's time. Well, they may have certain blind spots, and so they may be very intelligent, but moral superiority and intelligence are two different things. And part of our spiritual growth is about the balance between moral intelligence and morality, intelligence and morality. And this, as I mentioned before, it is essential that we scrutinize all communications rigorously in a mediumistic meeting. It is essential to look at every word, every sentence. Does everything seem okay? Is there any sentence in there that's a little odd or perhaps off color in some way? Any kind of language issues that might reveal the character of a lower order spirit, and so forth. Here are some useful techniques for communicating with spirits. Spirits appear spontaneously or when evoked. Spirits may show up if they can, in other words, if they're allowed to, or they may refuse to show up. Their reaction depends on the intentions of the person who is trying to communicate with them. So the spirits can read our intentions a lot of times. They can get an idea of what we're really after, and then they can respond accordingly. In terms of the proper manner of speaking to spirits, well, to summarize it, it would be irreverent to treat high order spirits as our equals, just as it would be ridiculous to show the same deference to all spirits without exception. We should venerate those who deserve it, recognize those who protect and assist us, and show the others the same benevolence that we ourselves might need someday. Very, very important advice from item 279 on how to address spirits. Kardec emphasizes, or the Medium's book emphasizes, that we can never be too careful about the manner in which we question spirits, and especially about the nature of the questions themselves. And the Medium's book points out that the key to good questions is to really think about form and scope. What's meant by form? Questions that are clear, that are quite precise, questions that pay attention to the sequence. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the word Seder. Seder means order for Passover. And I suggest that the Medium's book is very much about order. The order in which the information is laid out throughout the entire Medium's book serves a purpose. And in the subject of questions, the order in which questions are asked of spirits is important. They should be methodical, well, maybe methodical but thoughtful. Therefore, it's a very good idea to prepare questions beforehand. And there are advantages to doing that, because when questions are prepared ahead of time, it can help spirits to anticipate the questions, because the thoughts start to go out there and the spirits may be able to prepare in advance. Besides form, scope is even more important. We should avoid questions that test the spirit's perspicacity. In other words, that's a fancy word for don't ask questions of spirits in which you're trying to test their knowledge or their astuteness, because it can come across as kind of condescending. Because when we ask questions that are trying to test someone's knowledge, we're basically saying, let's see just how smart you really are. You know, that kind of thing. Questions should be serious and not banal. In other words, they should not be, and they should not meander. They should not be childish. Otherwise, high-order spirits will zero in on these intentions or realize this is not a serious inquiry, and they will withdraw. We should avoid questions about the future and past lives. Obviously, people love to know about this stuff, but here's a couple of important points. If humans knew the future, they would neglect the present. There's a comment about where our focus should be, on the here and now, not on the future. Also, the manifestation of spirits is not a means of fortune telling. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I like this quote. You should realize that your future existence cannot be known beforehand, since it will be determined by you yourself according to your conduct while on earth and your resolutions as a spirit afterwards. So why are we worrying about the future when what we're doing right now is going to have an impact on our future? How to avoid contradictions and deceptions with communications from spirits? Well, as a general suggestion, it is a very good idea to be patient, because truth reveals itself slowly. By slowly, I mean it could be decades or centuries even, depending upon which truth we're really talking about. I like this. There's a series of quotes from the Spirit of Truth on this area that is very, that I would like to share with you all. One should not ask of Spiritism anything more than what it can and must give you. Its goal is the moral perfection of humankind. As long as you hold on to this, you will never be deceived. Again, anything more than what it can and must give you. So the more we understand the codification, the more we can understand what it can give us and what it must give us, and what is really important and what isn't. Spirit of Truth also said that the spirits have come to teach you and guide you along the path of morality and not the path of fame and fortune, or to attend to your petty passions. So questions that are ego-driven in some way are inviting spirits of a lower order to provide erroneous answers. So they should be avoided. And as the Spirit Truth said, if you see spirits as substitutes for fortune tellers and spellcasters, then you will be deceived. So again, We always have to be mindful about our intentions and what we're really asking for. How do we avoid charlatanism and trickery when getting communications? Well, a general point, Spiritism does not mix money with mediumship. And this is how Spiritists try to practice good ethics. Now, since not all mediums are Spiritists, there are those that believe differently. Charging money is not always bad in every single case. The Medium's book does mention this. But the consequences of charging will depend on a medium's intentions. So at the end of the day, Spiritism never charges for mediumship, and any Spiritist that does is not practicing Spiritism. Does that mean that it's always bad throughout the entire planet in every instance? No. But again, what are the intentions of the medium in charging? And here's a good reason not to charge. Mediumship is granted for practicing the good, and the good spirits withdraw from anyone who intends to transform it into a means for reaching anything contrary to the designs of providence. So what are the designs of providence? As we reflect on that, we have to respect it. Section 3 of Part 2 begins to wrap up with some thoughtful advice about meetings and societies. Now, back in Kardec's time, they often called Spiritist organizations societies. These days, we can just use the word center, but the information in the advice is still applicable. So, about meetings, mainly mediumistic meetings. But you could talk about the environment of a center too. A meeting is a collective being whose qualities and properties are the sum of its members, forming a sort of cluster. And this cluster will be stronger the more homogeneous it is. A group of individuals with the same intent is more effective. And that when a spirit comes into an environment which is completely sympathetic, it feels more at ease. So in a mediumistic meeting, it is up to the participants to be harmonious in their intentions, to have the same goal, and the more they help collectively create a trusting environment, then a spirit will relax in that environment. If thoughts are divergent, however, they cause a collision of disagreeable ideas for the spirit and thus harm the manifestation. So again, if members of a mediumistic meeting want to be successful, they all have to be unified with their intent. And as a general rule of thumb, usually small, intimate gatherings are more effective. After all, if you've got a mediumistic meeting with, let's say 36 people, which would be pretty crazy, imagine 36 people all having the same thought and intention. It wouldn't work. Now about societies, again, Spiritist centers. Larger organizations function better when members truly understand the Spiritist codification. Now that might seem like an obvious comment, but there's understanding the codification, then there's really understanding the codification. And it's very important that we all do our best to thoroughly understand the codification, which is an ongoing process and pretty much does take our entire lifetime, because we're always learning and there's always something new to be discovered. And even more difficult is putting the codification into practice in our daily lives, because that's where the test really is. And so this may sound like an obvious point, but it's not so obvious, and it's essential. After all, pride, triggered by the slightest contradiction and self-centeredness, can cause disunity. This can certainly happen in any Spiritist center if nobody is paying attention. I like this comment. This one sort of flies by a little bit as you read, but it's a very important point. Be careful about what holds a meeting together. Now, we can be talking about a mediumistic meeting, but we could also be talking about a Spiritist center as a whole. Nonetheless, the very commitment which links the members of a meeting together creates obstacles to doing so, which is why it is proper to avoid indissoluble commitments. So what does that mean? Well, suppose a Spiritist center is made up of one or two individuals who are so essential to the operation of that center that if they leave, and people leave centers all the time, they come and they go, if that person leaves, the whole center falls apart. This means that the foundation of that center was kind of shaky to begin with, and perhaps was more of a house of cards. Ideally, a Spiritist center operates so that its members, hopefully they're all dedicated, but if any of them ever leave or do need to leave, again, it will happen, the center can still operate because the structure of the center is such that there are not these dysfunctional, unhealthy relationships between certain individuals that could cause their departure to be affect everything, and people suddenly are lost when that person's no longer there. So this type of the way a Spiritist center is put together through the personalities of its members is really, really important to try to work on. Centers, or Spiritist societies, if you will, should avoid rivalries with each other. And by pointing this out, the Medium's book is saying what centers should stand for. And I'd like to share these ideas with you. What good is it to believe in the existence of spirits if such belief does not make one better, kinder, and more accepting of one's fellow beings, and humbler and more patient in adversity? What about this one? It is towards a providential purpose that all serious Spiritist societies should tend, grouping together all those who have the same sentiments. And this is a wonderful quote. We invite all Spiritist societies to participate in this great work. From one end of the world to the other, may they extend the hand of fraternity, and thereby they shall snare evil in the laces of an inextricable web. I'm starting to wrap up, and this last comment, well, one way to think about the effort going on nowadays of more and more Spiritist centers to interact with each other, collaborate, share information, and so forth, is to try to work on, gently and slowly changing the overall moral tone of the planet. Spiritism is not here on a crusade to save the world. It's rather inviting all of us to work on improving ourselves. And the more we do that, that can gradually begin to make positive changes. The last chapter in the Medium's book is called Dissertations by Spirits. And there's one from Chateaubriand who said this 160 years ago. And I'd like to share this with you to close. He mentions, and Chateaubriand, by the way, was a French writer in the late 1700s, early 1800s, kind of a royalist, really defended Catholicism when people were backing away from it, and so forth. He says, communications are opening up in every nation. When the material barriers are finally overcome, political and religious prejudices will rapidly disappear along with moral obstacles that hinder unity. Thereby, the reign of fraternity will be solidly and durably established. Look how sovereigns themselves, impelled by an invisible hand, have already initiated reforms, something unheard of previously. Reforms that start from above are quicker and more lasting than those that start from below by means of force. It's interesting that he said this over 160 years ago. Now, reforms certainly can happen from below, but they don't have to happen by force. And he was talking about a different world of his time. But even so, how much of this, if we adapt it to the modern world, the way in which we are changing through the interaction? Just one example, the way the internet spreads information, encourages democracy, for instance, freedom of thought, and so forth. The Medium's book, to conclude, is a little bit like a tree, because everything I just told you I did it very quickly. And every single thing I touched on could easily be a presentation unto itself. And there are many of them out there on the internet that I would encourage you to explore. And of course, I invite all of you to read the Medium's book for yourself, because there's so much more to it than what I touched on. By being like a tree, the Medium's book has, if you will, several branches, and each one invites much further exploration. And like a tree, the Medium's book is always growing. And so I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was amazing. It was great pearls of reminders, if you will, contained in the Medium's book that you shared with all of us here today. Great things to take home and think about, and important references for a better knowledge about mediumship and mediumistic development. And now let's turn our attention to mediumship itself and how important it is to know how to make good use of this tool in our lives. Now, there was a slight change. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Sandra Mussi cannot participate today. Instead, we have another special guest, Mr. Jose Mussi, or Joe, former president of the Canadian Spiritist Council, one of the founders of the Toronto Spiritist Society, and currently working as the president of this organization. Joe will be talking about mediumship, tool for regeneration. Please, Joe.
Thank you, Kirsten. Welcome to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. Unfortunately, Sandra can't be. She sends her regrets. She has a bit of a situation with her eyesight that she needed to rest them. So she is getting better, but I'm here today to fill in. Hopefully, I will do a reasonable job in substituting what she had prepared for you. So the theme of this lecture now is around the mediumship as a tool for regeneration. So let me just share my presentation here. So the word regeneration will be seen from two different angles that will come together very nicely at the end. The first is around the regeneration of the medium himself or herself, or themselves. This will be described, and the previous presentation really started to introduce a lot of these concepts. I'll go a little bit more deep into that conversation of the role of the moral evolution of mediums and the impact that it has to the quality of the communications, and in their role in the overall bigger regeneration, which I'll also be talking about, which is the planetary regeneration. And this is something that we're hearing more and more over the last few years, and will continue to grow. And this has been expected, and it's been awaited, and the time started to come. So I'll be using a lot of references from obviously the Medium's book that we're celebrating the 160th anniversary, but also quite a bit from the Gospel According to Spiritism, and at the end from Genesis as well. Why don't we start with the Bible, with the gospel, right? Jesus already told us 2,000 years ago that there are many dwellings in my Father's house, right? And that he's preparing the place for us in these houses. What we understand, what he was trying to tell us, is that these houses are the various places in which spirits will evolve during their existence, during the many reincarnations that they will have. And these houses are actually different planets. So there are planets that serve a certain level of evolution for spirits, and others that are becoming more and more evolved. And through the Spirit's book and other publications in Spiritism, we start to learn a little bit more about the various levels of evolution that planets come through. And as a Spiritist, we know that this is the same that happens with the spirit. We're born simple and ignorant, and through our reincarnatory process, we slowly but consistently progress to higher and higher levels. So it's fascinating to see the symmetry that God has created between the spiritual and the physical world. everything evolves. Everything has a path and a purpose, and this will be complemented by one being ready for the other. So Jesus is preparing all of the various planets for these new generations, these new groups of spirits that are continuing in their evolutionary process. So it's very clear from early in our Christian path that this has already been foretold to us. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, we'll talk a little bit more about the types of different types of planets. So regenerative worlds is what we are moving into, and we're going to be talking about this. And they serve as a transition between what's called the worlds of expiation and the worlds of bliss. So the worlds of where we are going through our suffering as a mechanism for our own individual evolution, and the worlds of bliss where we become dedicated workers for good. In these transition that we will be talking quite a bit about, it's not perfect, right? But it is a period in which we will see a lot more happiness, that we will not be so burdened with constant suffering and expiations, and we'll be more focusing on working on our improvement and all of the goodness and all of the charitable work that we can do. Of course, compared to where we are today, these are very, very happy worlds. One thing that's also important is that these transitions, right, from the world of expiation to this world of regeneration or worlds of bliss, there's not a hard line. There's no kind of ribbon that we cut as we go from one to the other. This is a slow evolutionary transition period. So when we look back, we can see how much the planet has evolved. But as we live in it, these changes will take centuries, if not thousands of years. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So always understand that in the language of Spiritism, when we talk about the spirit of evil, what we're really meaning is that evil is just a characteristics of imperfect spirits. So anytime we do something that is according to God's law, we're practicing goodness. Anytime that we go against his laws and do the opposite, these are acts of evil. The spirits ourselves are not necessarily good or evil. We are going through this evolution. So in this worlds of regeneration, as the word implies, evil has not completely gone away. It's still there, but it no longer has the predominance that we see over the last few thousand years on Earth, right? And ultimately, what is causing this change in the overall evolution of our planet has much to do about the level of evolution of the spirits who are living on them. So right now we have over 7 billion souls that are incarnated on Earth today. So our level of evolution is kind of a sum of the average of the evolution of all of these spirits. And obviously the consequences of the acts of all these souls impact how much goodness and how much evil or wrong things are taking place. So as we move, as the planet becomes more and more evolved, as we start to see more understanding of what is the correct way to proceed, how to treat each other, how to be more loving with each other, we still have to somehow separate those spirits who probably are not evolving as fast as they should. So in some ways, these spirits, as they come back and reincarnate, they might find very difficult to continue their path on this planet. So what happens? Are they sent to some kind of ugly place and punished because of that? Of course not. The mercy of God is infinite, and he has devised a means by which these spirits, if they are struggling and they have not yet learned all the lessons, they'll be able to reincarnate in other planets that are more like Earth today, rather than what Earth will be in the next few centuries. In this way, they will then, kind of going for a second period, they will have a chance to continue their evolution, go through the struggles, through the expiations and the trials that they have to go through, and hopefully at one point they will, as everybody else, reach the level that they can then join them in a world that is of regeneration. It could be the same world that they reincarnated in, and this other time, or they could actually come back to our planet here as it's waiting for them. So notice that the process is continuous, it's all inclusive, and ultimately what we're doing is changing things at a very definite but very slow pace. Now, we can look back in our history and see that we've been in this world of trials and expiation for many thousands of years, right? We can kind of even imagine that's been maybe 5, 6, 7,000 years, maybe going back to Babylon when we first started getting our societies organized, the laws being created, and the first codes of morality being put in. That was the beginning of really this period. But obviously what we have seen is that we have much to learn. We'll still have many wild instincts. We're still very aggressive with each other. We still kill each other. We still face a lot of our own challenges and our own internal demons of our failures. And this has been improving. Obviously, we cannot compare where we are today to how we were 5, 10,000 years ago. And we're now ready to go to the next level, right? As we move into this idea of a regenerative world. And this follows one of the few laws given to us as divine laws, which is the law of progress. And that is essentially a law of nature, and it applies to everything in this universe, whether it's our planet, whether it's our solar system, whether it's us as individuals. So the earth, and this is being told by St. Augustine back in 1862. So this is 160 years ago. St. Augustine is already telling us through the communications with the mediums at the time that we have arrived at a period of transformation. So this is not something that started now. It started 160, maybe even more years ago. And this is where we're going from the expiatory world to a regenerative one. And this has been planned, this has been expected, and it will take time. So 160 years might seem like a long time to us in terms of our kind of view of our own lifetime, but from the big picture of the planet, it's very little. And you see that these transformations are in some ways aligned with the divine revelations that we have received, whether it was a revelation that we have, the first revelation from Moses, which goes back 7,000 years, when we started to really move from a primitive world into one more of trials and expiations, to Jesus coming to earth 2,000 years ago and giving his message, giving his lessons to us of how we need to the trials that are given to us in order to love that name. And now in the 19th century, Kardec is other things. And why is that the case? Why is that kind of that late 19th century is a time where a man was progressing very quickly in scientific knowledge. We're about to start going into Freud and other scientists will be kind of going through the discovery of our own mind, or progress taking place from an intellectual perspective. But unfortunately, and we know this, and historically, with this advance in technology and in knowledge and science comes also its dark side, its ability to destroy, to use as weapons of war, to use it to fulfill our greed and our ambitions, to basically oppress our fellow brothers and sisters. And of course, this ended up into the First and Second World War, which was a terrible time. So during the late 19th century, it was the right time to start introducing the tá congelado? Introducing the notion of regeneration, because now with the evolution of our technology, we needed to work on our morality as well and make sure that we're evolving this accordingly as we go from one to another. In a recent book published by Divaldo, called No Rumo do Mundo da Regeneração, in the path of the world of regeneration, Divaldo brings us much new information about what is happening with this evolution of the planet. And he talks about a lot of very contemporary things that are happening, including the COVID-19 pandemic, in terms of how this is simply a completion of these cycles of the transition to the next level of regeneration worlds. A lot of these tragedies that are taking place, they are required. They are to bring forth the concerns about the evolution of our morality. And as such, we should embrace it and we should be prepared for the consequences of our acts and make sure that we are evolving accordingly to make sure that the intellectual and moral development of human beings, as they become sensitive to beauty and reflection, and then with it, we gain a new perception to the so-called paranormal phenomena, those that come from the spirits. And he also tells that with the passing of time, through the increasing exercise of mediumistic faculties, the phenomena will become normal, making this delicate physical sense more exquisite and transcendental. Increasingly, we find that spiritual energy carries all the values that make up animal life, and especially that of humans. So he's setting up the stage for the next part of this lecture in the sense that he is kind of letting us know that the phenomenon of mediumship, of these faculties, are going to go to a hyperdrive now. They're going to become more normal, more predominant. And they will be used as part of this regeneration process as we move forward. This will bring me now to talk a little bit about what are the mediums. And we heard in the previous part of the lecture, Peter was explaining this quite well. I'll just go through some of these details just to set the stage of how this then, in terms of the moral evolution of the current mediums, are going to set the stage for what's going to happen over the next generations of mediums. So we heard that the faculty of mediumship is inherent to all humankind, right? So everyone, to a certain extent, is a degree, is a medium. Now, that doesn't tell us everything, right? Because as I use it as an example, I know how to run. I can run a little bit, but nobody will ever call me a runner. So runners are those who have expert qualities and are very talented and have trained to become excellent in what they do. The same is true with mediumship and mediums. So for the purpose of this lecture, and of course, following what Kardec himself used during the creation of the Medium's book, the term medium will be kind of used mostly to focus on those individuals who have demonstrated this ability quite clearly through ostensive mediums, through ability to do psychography and other types of phenomena. So these are the mediums that we're going to be discussing. And these are, I would call them, the frontline workers of this process of regeneration that we're experiencing right now. Now, to understand this we must focus on what do mediums have to become in order to be good workers, frontline workers, right? And Kardec already tells us that mediumship is not an art, it's not a talent, is a capability that's given to God to us, and basically making the medium capable of clear communications or interactions with spirits. But obviously that requires that the spirit on the other side is available to be part of that communication, right? And we don't control them, right? So we need to make sure that as mediums, that we preserve the dignity of the mediumship activity. And those who exploit it really are trying to make use of something that they really never owned. It was not theirs. It was just half of the equation of how this would take place. Which brings us to the point that often causes a lot of unfortunate consequences in terms of, should mediums be proud of the work they produce with the communication with spirits? Well, pride is a very difficult sentiment. It might represent kind of be happy that you're doing good work, but most often it is shown in its most negative characteristic, right? And we know that pride is almost always aroused in the mediums by those who surround them. Not surprising, because if we look at this capability of mediumship throughout the centuries and the millenniums, they were actually surrounded by a lot of mysticism and rituals and other things that usually the person who was the medium would surround themselves with all of this particular glory or specialty. They were deemed to be very special, so they wanted to be very special, and they were veneered as special emissaries of God. Well, we know that that's not the case. But it's still very easy for us, or spirits who lived in those periods, to fall in the same trap and try to shower the medium with unnecessary enthusiasm and make them try to feel that they're superior, that they're better than anybody else, and that they're special because they have this capability. And this will soon put these airs of importance and disdain into the medium, and they will start to believe that story themselves. And at that point, that is the beginning of the end for them, because what's going to happen is that they will start to take on this toxic praise, and they will start avoiding to do any self-critique. They will think that they are infallible. And as this, their vanity will increase, and they will be subject to basically the spirits turning their backs on them, because that mediumdom becomes compromised. Blaise Pascal, a famous mathematician, already said, even when he was incarnated, and then he participated in a lot of passages in Kardec's books, is that vanity is but the surface, right? So we're painting ourselves with something that we're not deep inside. The medium is an instrument. It is a tool. He is using capabilities that we all have, but they are being given a mission at this incarnation to work on it and be part of the process of helping others understand our purpose, understand our missions, and using the disincarnated spirits for that purpose. And so here begs the question that Kardec asks, is then the development of mediumship related to the moral level or progress of the mediums themselves? So what he's asking is, to be a medium, to be given this ostensive ability, do you need to be highly moral perfect? Well, first of all, nobody is perfect. And secondly, if the spirits were going to wait to have a lot of peoples with high levels of moralities, they wouldn't have a lot of mediums to work with. So they are very clear. No, the two things are not necessarily related. The capability of having mediumship abilities is not related to the medium's own level of evolution from a morality or an intellectual perspective, which means people who are not very educated or people who have questionable morals can be mediums because they are exercising the capability that was given to them. But most importantly now, it is how they apply their morality that's going to influence or impact how much good or bad their communications can cause to themselves and to others. So again, the medium's morality is affecting the quality of the communication or the interaction they have with the spirits. So pride has led to many, many very good mediums to have been taken off the righteous path. And that's been most unfortunate because some of them were very quite special. They had very special gifts. But soon, as we described, they were showered with praise and glories, and suddenly they started to present communications, messages that did not really belong or up to what they had doing before. And unfortunately, they lose the ability to communicate, and often they are humiliated at the end by the fact that the spirits have abandoned them and looking for other mediums who are best suited for them. So the other thing is that the mediums must understand that the communications that they're passing is not their responsibility, right? If they are criticized, the medium must look inside to see, is there something inside them that's causing to bring to them spirits that are not the best ones, that are not giving them the best messages. But don't be offended that it's not they who are actually creating the message, they are just repeating them. So what they need to do is to make sure that they continue into this moral evolution of themselves in order that their qualities improve and they will be attracted to better and more advanced spirits. And then the communications, the messages, and the work that they do will be elevated accordingly. So this is how mediums attract good and higher spirits. But among the qualities that one must have are those that Jesus has taught us from even the Sermon of the Mount in terms of being a person of humility, of devotion, selflessness, and complete immoral and material disinterest. So that's why we don't have mediums working as a profession, right? Because then they will be very much linked from a material perspective. They must also have the humility to understand what they are doing, the purpose that they were doing, and not see themselves better or in some way special compared to everyone else. We're all the same. We also all have a role, a mission to perform in this life, and we must never forget that. And with this, the same is true with the mediumship meetings, right? So if the meeting is prepared properly, if the environment, if the individuals, the mediums who are participating in the meeting are all of similar moral correctness, they will attract better spirits. If other has people using this as some kind of a game or something for fun, and of course, this will be just attracting frivolous and less serious mediums and spirits, and the result will not be good at all. Now, one thing I'd like to comment is a lot of what the Medium's book talks about in terms of the role of the medium is in terms of communications. And this was certainly true at the time of Kardec, where he was trying to put together the codification. He was trying to understand. So there was a lot of evocation, a lot of questions around the spiritual world, a lot of answers and directions that are being given by the spirits. This still happens today, but today things have changed quite a bit because most of the work the mediums do today are in the assistance of discarnated spirits who are lost, who are wandering, and they need some assistance from our side in collaboration with the spiritual teams to help them move on, to help them move away from the connections that they had with the material world and allow them to proceed on their evolutionary process. So all of this is important. The same is that the mediums now, morality is going to impact how they serve and provide assistance to this discarnated spirits altogether. So the message is still the same, but the purpose of many of the communications have evolved quite a bit. They will continue to evolve, as we will see towards the end, because now the mediums will have a different role, not only assisting the discarnated, but also providing more and more guidance to the incarnated. So this also means that the surroundings work a lot in terms of the influence of these manifestations, right? Can't higher order spirits overcome any kind of these deficiencies? Because we're not perfect, right? So can they kind of look aside and not be so strict on the demands that they have on each one of our imperfections? Yes. And they can certainly do this. And they have been doing this for centuries now, as I said, because we simply weren't fully ready for them. So highly evolved spirits can sometimes communicate with the most unexpected people, right? And they will provide assistance, and they will actually hope that these interactions will overcome any of the deficiencies the medium might have, or the surroundings, depending on where they are, where they live, and so forth. So there's a lot that the spirits can do, but there's much that we have to do on our side to help them so they can find better paths to provide us the guidance that we need to jump into this period of regeneration that we're starting to see more and more. And in that same sense, does the medium's own spirit influence these communications? We are kind of in a bit of a kind of concern that the medium could be influencing too much. And it's inevitable, yes. There's always the influence. First, in the affinity that the medium has with the spirit themselves. The medium does not exert influence on the communicating spirits themselves. The spirits are who they are. They're not going to be influenced if they're coming in for this communication. But the medium can influence how this message is transmitted, on the tone, on the words he chooses, because a lot of it is not dictated word by word. It could be more thoughts, more ideas that are put into the medium's mind. And these need to be somehow translated into words or into verbal words or written words. So there's a lot that the medium will be involved, and certainly the medium spirits will have a role to play. But what they cannot do is to substitute their own personal ideas, their biases, their imagination, right, with what the spirits are trying to do. And how do they do this? Well, it takes a lot of practice, a lot of deep meditation and concentration to make sure that they can fully absorb the message that are coming from the spirits and try not to tint them with their own lenses too much, right? We don't want to hear what the medium thinks. We want to hear what the spirit is trying to say. The medium can provide a little bit of wrapping around that, but we don't want to see the reflection of the personal spirit of the medium. So all of this drives this necessity to make sure that the medium is fully evolving with their responsibilities, that they are maintaining that humility, maintaining that dedication to the work that they do, in order to ensure that they will not be overly influencing what's going to come out of their mouths or out of their hands. So do certain spirits prefer certain mediums? Absolutely, right? They couldn't be otherwise, right? They look for the interpreter who best connects with them. So mediums who are more of moral and intellectual capabilities will attract similar spirits. And this is the same that we experience in our own lives. So we're attracted to people who are like us, who can understand us, who can understand them, who we find some level of affinity, even though we may not agree with them all the time. But we need to have a certain amount of equity between ourselves. And this is what the spirits are doing. So at this point, it becomes very clear that the medium in his journey, because mediumship is not a task, it's a journey. It's a journey of evolution. It's a journey of dedication, a journey of the work that they do. And as I said, both on the communication, but also in the spiritual assistance. And they are pushed, I would say, farther and harder than many of us otherwise would be, because they sense the responsibility of doing so. So, as instruments of the spirits, their responsibilities will grow with the transition that the planet is going to. As we become in this world of regeneration, we need to use the mediums as our guiding lights, as I said, as our first responders, as the ones who will provide us the path to proceed and to educate us. And how should we behave, and how should we ensure that we're following the same evolutionary path? And of course, the qualities that we'll be looking for are ones of goodness, benevolence, simplicity of heart, love for one's neighbors, which Christ has already told us 2,000 years ago, and detachment from material things. What we have to try to shed and move away from are all of those defects, sometimes called sins or evil acts that we do, that are associated with pride, selfishness, envy, jealousy, hate, greed, sensuality, and all of these passions that really keep us too much attached to matter. We're still material beings, and we can't be completely detached from matter, but we can't make them the most important thing to us. It can't be the thing that drives us. All of the other things should take priority, and they should be available to everyone in terms of the assistance that we give them. So as we come to the end, let's go to the book of Genesis. I often find that this is an underappreciated book. It has a lot of great gems. And Kardec already tells in chapter 18 that the time has come, right? He was telling us that the time for regeneration was starting back then. And we're now seeing more and more of this picking up the pace. It says, our globe, like everything else, is subject to the laws of progress. It progresses physically through the transformation of the elements, and morally through the purification of the incarnate and discarnate spirits that populate. So here is the trick, right? We are incarnated today, but we were disincarnated not too long ago. The spirits that the mediums are assisting in their mediumship sessions, the discarnates, will be incarnated very soon. So we are also assisting and educating these new generations of spirit that will come, and they will be kind of the ones that really will be pushing the transformation of the planet. I don't know about most of you, but I certainly can see how these new generations, I have 4 grandchildren, and almost daily amazed on how different they are from previous generations. They were born differently. They are born with a sense of perception, of intellect, of emotional maturity that I had never experienced in any of previously from my children's generation or even my own generation. So these are not biological evolutions. These are moral evolutions of the spirits. And who's helping these spirits evolve? Well, a lot of it happens during the discarnate period, and our mediums are helping them, as long as with the spiritual teams that are working together with each of the spiritual centers around the world. So all of these areas must progress. We must progress physically, intellectually, technology, but morally as well. We have to agree that we have made incontestable progress, right? And this was 160 years ago, even so more. I mean, imagine how much has changed since the time of Kardec, right? And we can name anything that we look at these days, and they're very different from what he was back then. But other areas have not progressed as much, right? That we have evolved, but not as much as we should. We have to make charity, fraternity, and solidarity as the number one of our priorities. And this is not the case today. We're still very focused on material, on technology, on earnings, money. And this has the effect of separating us. So this is the age that we must enter now, the one that we will start prioritizing more of the moral evolution than ever before. And this will not be a partial change, because we've seen partial changes. We know people who have been very charitable. We have seen that overall we have individuals who obviously show this level of evolution. But to really put ourselves in the context of this full regeneration of the planet, this has to be a universal movement in terms of the moral progress. And we're seeing this battle happening today, right? With the internet, we have polarized ourselves, and now we see two sides trying to gain the moral high ground. Obviously, each one thinks they have the high moral ground, the higher morality high ground, but the reality is that we need to go back to the gospel, the original lessons that Christ gave us, because there we will find the answers. What is in fact the true morality that we're seeking? And nothing teaches us more than that, than the Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew 5, which it clearly lays out the priorities that we must make in our lives. And hopefully this will mean that the future generations, which could be the next one, or maybe 100, 200 years from now, will be animated by different ideas and sentiments. Will be hopefully a generation that's going to be more focused in protecting the planet, protecting individuals, helping one another, making sure that we're not abusing or exploiting other people, other races, or people who are different than us. We have to agree that the current state of affairs still leaves a lot to be desired, right? But to change this can only be accomplished through a profound development of our morality. And here's where the mediums will act as one of the main tools to provide the guidance to the rest of the population, no longer just for the discarnate, but also to the incarnates. Hopefully, as we will see, more and more mediums will be born. So we'll have a greater number of these mediums acting together to achieve this universal transformation that we've been promised. And this will break down the barriers that separate us. Unfortunately, we still have many barriers, whether they're physical barriers, they're walls, there are laws, there are kind of prejudice that separates us from each other. And what we will need to achieve is to start breaking these walls down one by one, and focus on what's called the inarguable eternal truths, the laws that God has given us, and that make sure that they are accepted and practiced by everyone. So in conclusion, the world is transforming. We've been experiencing, and it seems that that transformation is accelerating. The regeneration of humankind, therefore, does not absolutely require spirits to be completely renewed, because we're not yet going through the world of bliss. We're going through a world of regeneration. A modification in their moral outlook is sufficient, but that modification has to be universal, not by 5% of the population, 1% of the population, but by the majority of the population. And this will occur to all of those who are predisposed to do so. And hopefully, as I said, every new generation that is born, this will take a new priority for them. And this will be quite different, as Kardec says, that the effect when it takes place simultaneously among large masses. So it's the scale. It's going to be everywhere and across the world, in all of the countries and all of the places and the races. And basically, the idea that this evolution of morality will profoundly change people, the races, the very fabric of our society through a kinder, more loving world. Well, this is the end. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It was a pleasure to be here with you. I hope that everybody has enjoyed this series of lectures offered by the International Spiritist Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mussi. That was wonderful. Excellent points to reflect on about mediumship and how we as mediums have such a huge responsibility towards this task while we're incarnated. So with much gratitude to all of our speakers in this segment in English, we're going to conclude with our closing prayer. And before, however, we would like to thank everyone who participated in this event yesterday and today. It has been such a special event because it brought together many countries and many Spiritist workers and many friends in several languages from different parts of the world. Talk about unity. And we had the privilege of celebrating together the 160th anniversary of the Medium's book. So let's keep learning more and using the tool of mediumship for the progress of humankind. For us to close not only this segment, but the overall event, we invite Hosanna Batista from Canada to say our closing prayer. Hosanna is a former board member of the Canadian Spiritist Council, currently president of the Paul of Tarsus Spiritist Society in Canada. Hosanna, please.
Thank you, Kirsten. So, thank you very much, all the speakers, and I would like to invite you all now to close your eyes. Let us allow our hearts to be filled with gratitude for the opportunity of being here together. Let us thank the International Spiritist Council for promoting this event that brought together several countries and people speaking 6 different languages, united on the same objective. Let us thank the lecturers and all participants for being here. Let us allow this gratitude to fill up our hearts, and let us elevate our thoughts, reaching out to the higher spirits that are here with us, and to Jesus, our guide and model. And together, let us exercise charity by sharing this energy with others by the means of vibrations. Let us imagine that this beautiful energy is expanding as we vibrate, and it involves the entire planet, all living beings, more specifically, all spirits, incarnated or discarnate. Let us ask Jesus to send his emissaries and distribute this energy to support, to inspire, and comfort all those in need. And with our hearts full of love and joy, let us thank once more Jesus and God for this opportunity. Leaving this event encouraged to look for opportunities to morally evolve every day. And so be it.
Thanks, Rosanna, and thanks to everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.